Year 10. Welcome back to Whitechapel and Crime and Punishment. Our title for today is Why Was Whitechapel So Difficult to Police? So we want to be learning about the contextual information, the historic environment of Whitechapel in the East End of London, and we're going to be able to explain with examples the problems faced by the police in Whitechapel. And right at the end, we'll do a little bit of exam practice with a new kind of question that we haven't yet looked at, so make sure you stick around for that. So the first thing that I would like you to do is down in the description box there is a link to a very short video that I'd like you to watch. Now, it talks about the different problems that police in the H Division had to deal with. On your worksheet, you have two columns, problem and the details of that problem. What I'd like you to do is watch the video. You should find 7 different problems and just do a little description of how they were actually a bit of an issue for the police in Whitechapel. So you should be completing the table as you watch the video. Let's take a look at those answers then. So, first problem is prostitution. As you saw, it's a big social issue, as every time these prostitutes or these women were arrested, they would instantly return back to the streets and start working again. There wasn't a long-term facility to help them. Pubs, alcohol and drugs were an issue because it led to a lot of drunken violence, public disorder, and the opening of opium dens didn't really help that situation. Media is a big problem because it turns every small crime into a very, very big crime, making Whitechapel seem perhaps like there's more crime than there actually was. Attitudes to the police is very important. They're a very new creation and people didn't trust them very much. So people were very hesitant to help and sometimes attack them. Lots of anti-Semitic feelings. Now, we're going to come on to this in a couple of lessons' time, but immigration is a big problem during this time period we're focusing on. Large-scale immigration leads to a lot of resentment towards the Jewish community, but also there's the practical issue of language barrier. So there's not much communication going on in this area because it's not just Jewish communities that have arrived in Whitechapel, there's other communities too, particularly Irish people, which also causes some tension. Gangs obviously lead to a lot of issues for police because it's more work for them to have to do, but then they also have gangs plotting against them, so it's kind of they're fighting from all sides. And then finally, Sir Charles Warren, we touched on him before we finished at school. He's the leader of the police force and he has no interest in dealing with the issues in Whitechapel and also wasn't actually very good at his job. So that touches on a couple of issues and we're going to look at those in a little bit more detail. Now, on your worksheet, you have 16 different cards. You are going to colour code those cards according to which category they fall into. So they all talk about the problems that police had to deal with, but you can categorise them into immigration, police, the environment, or you can create your own topic. Some of these cards may fall into 2 categories. So if you want to give them 2 colours, that's absolutely fine. The way I would colour them is you can either highlight them using Word or you can just change the colour of the font to indicate what group you think they fall into. Make sure you know what colour each category is worth. So if you're doing immigration as red, make sure you write that somewhere so that when I mark it, I understand how you've categorised your work. Pause the video here, have a look through the cards, get colour coding, okay? Moving on then, task 3 is to make a judgment and start to write down those ideas that we came up with in the last activity. You are going to complete these sentences on the Word document. So you're going to write the subheading task 3. One major problem faced by the police in Whitechapel was da-da-da-da-da-da, etc, etc. If you struggle to answer these questions using these sentence starters, you can change them. What I'm looking for is you making a decision on the main problem faced by police in Whitechapel. But I'd also like you to provide some evidence. So using those cards would be very, very helpful for you to justify your decision making. Okay? So if you think about it, one major problem in Whitechapel is our point. This can be highlighted by, would be our evidence. This indicates that would be our explanation. So we've got PEE. And then we're building on it. So in addition to this, you might also want to list another problem. Evidence, explanation. Okay, so it can all be broken down very simply into the structures that we use at school very regularly. Moving on then, Decide which factor you think was the greatest barrier to police in Whitechapel and give a peel paragraph explaining your choice. So very similar to the activity that we just did, but you have to pick one of the categories that you focused on this lesson. Okay, please make sure your structure is very, very clear. Try to use the sentence starters that we use in lessons. So I think that, this is because, this means that, therefore. Okay, try and keep that structure very, very strict. Again, writing it into your worksheet. So let's move on to exam skills then. The crime and punishment paper, as you know, is separated into two sections. The first section, section A, is all to do with Whitechapel. The next section is what we started doing your GCSE course on, so the years 1000 up to present day. We focused a lot on section B, but now we need to just fine-tune some of those skills that we gained and apply them to section A. So the first question, describe two features of, is something that you are very familiar with. You've just practiced it. A very straightforward question, worth 4 marks. The next question that you'd have to look at is how useful are sources A and B for an inquiry into. Now, one of my classes touched on this. I can't remember if we both did it, but that question also appears in your Nazi Germany paper. So it's very important we learn the structure of that. We're not going to do that in today's lesson. In today's lesson, we are looking at this question. How could you follow up source A to find out more about? Now, I think personally, this is one of the weirdest questions on the GCSE paper. I don't really like it. It's kind of confusing to answer, but we're going to take a look at it just now. So here is an example of a source that you may be given in an exam. This question, unlike 2A, focuses just on source A, so we're going to forget about source B for this question. The question you'd receive down here, the question you'd receive down here is actually split into 4 sentences. So, how could you follow up source A to find out more about the methods used in the police hunt for the Whitechapel murderer in 1888? Detail in source A that I would follow up, question that I would ask, the type of source I could use, how this might help answer my question. Now, last lesson there was an extension task that you had the opportunity to do that would build on you being able to answer this question. So if you had a go at that extension, well done, you're already one step ahead. Now, the reason this question is in the paper is because, as I always emphasise to you, studying history and being a historian is about answering questions and asking them. It's not a case of just absorbing information and saying this happened at this time. Anyone can do that. But the real core skills of studying history are you need to be able to investigate and want to find out more and push boundaries even further. And I get the logic of this question. It's getting you to look at one source and work out what your next steps are. So let's have a read through of this source then. From a report in the East London Advertiser newspaper, published on the 15th of September in 1888. The writer is commenting on the Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren's decision to bring in soldiers to help police Whitechapel. So that section up here is our provenance. Remember, we always split a source into 2 sections. The provenance is the who, when, where, why, and then you have the content, what the source is actually telling you. So, provenance tells us where it comes from, when it comes from, and what it's about briefly. So let's move on to the content then. The double stupidity of weakening his detective force and strengthening his ordinary police force from reserves and the military destroys 2 safeguards of a community. It deprives it of a specially trained force of men with brain power specifically adapted for detective work, and it takes away the old community constable, to be replaced by a man with a few years military service, but with no other qualification for serving the public. Nothing has indeed been more characteristic of the hunt for the Whitechapel murderer than the lack of local knowledge displayed by the police. They seem to know little of the dark alleyways of the neighbourhood, and still less of the bad characters who swarm through them. So essentially, this journalist is criticising the decision that Sir Charles Warren has made to take away some of the detectives from this case and replace them with ex-military members. Now, even though that might sound like a good idea in some ways, as this article points out, there are key problems with it. They don't know the local area, they haven't built up a good relationship with the people in the community, so their detective skills are going to be significantly lower than someone who's trained to do this job. Now, we've had a look at the source and the provenance. Let's go back to our question. How would you follow up this source that we've just read to find out more about the methods used to find Jack the Ripper? What other questions might you ask, or what might you do next if you wanted to find out, okay, so how did police actually try and catch this killer? I'm going to show you 2 examples on the next slides, and I would like you to make a decision as we read through on whether you think it's a weak, average, or strong answer. There's no need to write anything down, nothing needs to go into your notes. This is just an exercise for you to compare different styles of answer. So, we've got our question up here. It's worth 4 marks. Details in source A that I would follow up. The local police were replaced by men with a few years military service but no local experience. Very good, that might be something that I hadn't noticed or known about before, so I might want to find out more about it. Question I would ask. How many local police officers were involved in the hunt for Jack the Ripper? So again, what's the ratio of police officers who know the area versus those who have just been brought in from the army? Types of source I could use, police station records. How this might help answer my question. They would include reports from beat officers. Have a think. What kind of answer do you think this is worth? Remember, it's only out of 4. You should only be spending about 5-6 minutes on this. Well, according to Pearson and Edexcel, this is an average answer because the explanation of the choice of source is not very developed. So they haven't really explained their answers. They're very, very brief. Although personally, I don't think this is a terrible, terrible answer. Okay, so let's take a look at this one then. Same question applies, still worth 4 marks. Detail in source A that I would follow up. The local police were replaced by men with a few years military service, but no local experience. This part of the question is exactly the same as the one we just saw. Question I would ask, what proportion of men assigned to the Ripper case had strong knowledge of the local community? So again, a very similar kind of question, just worded a little bit differently. So they want to explore that comparison of local police officers to military men in a little bit more detail. This is where their answer differs significantly from the one that we just looked at. The type of source I could use, Metropolitan Police records stored by Scotland Yard showing the reports of and beats patrolled by H Division officers and the service history of those officers. Can you see how this answer is significantly more detailed than this? This shows that you are thinking historically and that you are thinking practically. You don't just want to get any police records. The best place to go would be Metropolitan Police by Scotland Yard. And then finally, how might this help answer my question? Again, very significant difference in the length of answer. If most of the reports of daily activity, particularly beat reports, were from long-serving men in the H Division, this would show that the investigation was being carried out by men with local knowledge. But if many reports were from men recently recruited from the army, it would show up the weakness suggested in source A. So this person is talking again about how this source and answering this question would help her investigation. Because remember, this historian is trying to find out about the methods used. So it's just really answering that question and supporting her existing knowledge. And Pearson says, this is a strong answer because connections between the source, details, the question, and the source chosen for follow-up are securely linked. And all that means is that it's just a good flow between all of these. The detail leads to the question leads to, okay, what kind of source should I use? And the kind of source you're using tells you how you're actually going to answer this question up here. Okay? I'm not going to ask you to practice any of this. I just want to start introducing it to you so that next lesson we can delve a little bit deeper into this. Okay? And that's it for today. Well done, Year 10. Please make sure you are submitting your worksheets using Schoology. Keep in contact with me and let me know if you have any questions. Okay? I will speak to you next lesson. Goodbye, Year 10.